Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Mikkipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here.
Hey everyone, this week on the podcast, I had the opportunity to grab an interview with Dr. Dan Plews, who is a show favourite. He's been on Mikkipedia a few times now, and also he's the coach of the freshly crowned Kona World Champion, Chelsea Sodaro, and she took top spot at Kona a couple of weeks ago as the first rookie to win Kona on her first try since 2007 when Chrissy Wellington did it, and also the first American to do it in over a quarter of a century. You will be well familiar with the fact that Dan Plews is the age group record holder, so he did 8:24 back there in 2018, and he's very familiar with Kona as an event. And so Dan and I discuss how he trained Chelsea, what were the things that they really focused on. Were there anything sex specific that he did to prepare her? We talked about the training metrics that they use, the importance of mindset, whether he takes care of everything or brings in other people. We really talked about it all. And we also discussed, where he sees other coaches or other athletes might go wrong in their training from his perspective. It was such a great conversation. We, of course, kick off with really important topics based around the fact that Dan did just turn 40. So he is no longer 35, amazing, and because in my head he's just been 35 forever, and a little bit on protein and his Funky Trunkies before getting into the nuts and bolts of the episode. So those of you who are unfamiliar with Dan or you haven't heard any of his previous episodes, we'll pop links to those in the show notes, but Dan is an applied sports scientist, researcher, coach, and he has been a former competitive triathlete as well. He hasn't quite retired yet. He's actually got a comeback coming, gently though. As an applied sports scientist, Dan has worked closely with athletes who've won more than 25 world and Olympic titles in sports, including rowing, kayak and triathlon. And he was also part of Rowing New Zealand's preparations for both the 2012 and 2016 in the Olympic Games as a sport scientist. As a researcher, Dan has a PhD in exercise physiology with a particular interest in heart rate variability and over 30 peer-reviewed publications to his name. As a coach, Dan has coached 3 professional Ironman triathletes to sub-8-hour times, including Terenzo Bozzoni, Jan van Berkel and Tim van Berkel, and of course now is coach to Chelsea Sodaro, who is our Hawaii Ironman champion. Dan recently founded EnduroIQ.com, which is an online learning hub for anyone interested in optimal long course triathlon performance. Dan can be found at enduroiq.com/about-us, but also head over to Instagram at the Plews. He's very active over on social media. So before we kick on into this episode, I'd just like to remind you the best way for you to support the podcast is to hit like and subscribe on your favourite podcast platform, Apple, Spotify, wherever it is that you listen to us, because that way people are much more aware of Mikkipedia in this very big podcast space, and they get the opportunity to hear from experts like Dan where they otherwise would not. So please do that. That would be amazing. All right, team, for now though, please enjoy this conversation that I have with Dr. Dan Plews. It comes out at a better recording than what you see. So it might unblur or something. I don't know.
Well, people probably don't want to see me in full vision anyway, so
Probably
I look better.
not.
I actually look better. It's my better side is the blurred side.
I would have thought so. So happy birthday for yesterday.
Well, yeah, thank you. Yeah. Well, I'm catching you up.
Well, it's interesting you say that because, of course, I don't know where I saw a picture of you 10 years ago and you had your bleach blonde hair and your, I can't remember what those glasses are called. But
racing jackets.
But
the race.
Yeah, Yeah, but your little chubby face,
Yeah, well, I was probably.
your little carbo face.
Do you know what though? You. I think you want to have a chubby face when you're younger. I always had very chubby cheeks when I was younger. Like, and it used to really annoy me because, grandparents and aunties would always grab your cheeks and go, "Oh, haven't you got lovely chubby cheeks?" And I'm like, "Ugh, leave me alone." But I reckon having a bit more fat on your face when you're younger gives you more of makes you a bit more youthful when you're growing older, right? Bit more fat around the around the cheeks.
Around the chops. No, I hear you actually, because of course, as you get older, you look a little more gaunt in your sort of endurance athleticism, and some people don't think it looks good.
No. Well,
no. Anyway,
it's keeping the baby face, as they say. But
yeah, exactly.
So I had a good day yesterday. I just did. My wife spoilt me, so it was it was epic.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. Now you made a big cake. Did you make it for yourself?
The Olaf cake.
Yeah.
Unfortunately not. Well, that was for Bella. Took me forever. It was a mission. I mean, I just committed to it, and I was like, right, I'm going to make your cake this year, Bella. And she's like, what do you want? What do you want for your birthday? What cake do you want? She went, I want an Olaf cake. So I was like, I looked online, and that was and it was like, I had to full on sculpt it. Like, the head was made out of Rice Krispies and marshmallows, and I made the cake, which was 5 cakes, and I molded it and sculpted it. It took me forever to do. It took me literally about a day's work, really. So her birthday was on Saturday. I made the cakes on Thursday, and then I sculpted it all on Friday and made it, but I was up until like 11 at night doing this. So
it was so impressive, Dan. And thankfully, though, you have a lot of experience in endurance and putting your mind to something and not quitting and committing and all of that discipline and stuff like that.
I don't think it's going to be an every year thing. I'm like, Jake's going to probably get it when he turns 5, and then Bella might get it. I think I'm just going to do it like every 5 years. You know?
That's good. When's Kate's birthday, by the way?
So she's 22nd of December. But,
okay, good.
So I haven't recovered. I mean, it's like anything, right? You don't do too many Ironmans back to back. I can't be doing. It's the recovery time between this cake and Kate's birthday is too short, so I'm not going to enter that competition. I'm not. Sorry, Kate, you're not getting a cake. I might buy it. I'll definitely buy a cake, but I'm definitely not making that one. Yeah.
Well, speaking of Ironman, you are, of course, the coach of the world Ironman champion, Chelsea Sodaro.
Yes, I am. Yeah. You
First
were there
American
watching.
in a quarter of a century. Yes. Oh my God, it was so great. I kept sending you, clearly you were watching it, but I just was like, oh my God, Dan, Chelsea's looking good. And then Chelsea falls off the tracker, and we're like, oh my God, what happened to Chelsea? But thankfully it was just a tracker blip. She looked amazing.
Mild heart attack.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. I was, no, it was so good, and it's been pretty awesome since. And, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that you always want to happen, but you never. I mean, the odds of you being the coach of a world champion are pretty low. So,
yeah. What were your expectations for the race, Dan? Like, I mean, obviously you've got the absolute pinnacle, which is actually what happened, but going in there last couple of weeks, what were your thoughts around it?
I knew she was in amazing shape. Let me just turn off this. Green, actually. Yeah, Green's messaging me. Give it a rest, buddy.
It's probably because he blew up the internet the other day by saying you had X amount of protein in a smoothie, and someone was like, you can't digest more than 30 grams out to lunch. People don't understand. People don't understand protein metabolism. That's what that is.
Yeah, well, I mean, and also, look, how do I turn this off, everyone? Come on, give me a break.
You put your do not disturb on, Dan.
Yeah, I'm going to do that now. Yeah. Now, well, what happened was I was round at his yesterday, and we had a sauna and an ice bath, and we're both fellow funky trunk lovers, and I left my funky trunks there, and he's just abusing me for leaving my funky trunks there at the moment, which is the messages that are coming through. Well, actually, he abused me, I abused him back, and now he's coming back to me. So
he's younger, he's got more stamina and in everything probably, so that's probably why you're getting a whole lot more, and you're probably like, oh, I'm over it, mate. But
I'm over it now. Yeah. Well, we did decide yesterday that we look the same age, so.
And that's probably doesn't say much. That's probably not a good thing for art, is it?
No, I look so young. What do you mean?
That's what that is.
That's what it is. That's what it is.
Yeah.
But we gone completely off topic. But the man does love a bit of protein in his smoothie.
Oh, he does.
But you know what? Like he's put on some good size from it. He reckons it's the key. So
well, yeah, totally. Well, that's what size. You know, obviously resistance training plays a big role in that, but you can't do that if you don't have the raw material to be able to get muscle. And he said that to me on our podcast as well. That one thing he focused on was ramping up the protein. And just for people who might have misunderstood my comment about people not understanding protein metabolism, I don't think that's art. I think it's everyone else who listens to things on social media that say...
and everyone who listens to the junk about protein being bad for you and it's going to kill you and it's going to give you cancer and whatnot. It's like,
No, I know. Actually, there is one going around at the minute that isn't about, and we will get back to Chelsea, obviously, but many people have sent it to me, and it's actually from a company, and they might be called Pure Essentials or something like that, and it's an essential amino acid powder, and their premise is that whey protein is going to kill you, that it doesn't digest properly, that it causes all of these issues, and it's a highly processed food. So have our essential amino acids, but like it is complete bollocks, actually. But it is crazy the number of people that buy into it.
And I know, and I always those things really frustrate me, and you'll be exactly the same because you know when some kind of article or something comes out. You suddenly get a lot of extra work because suddenly people are emailing you it all the time. It's like, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Have you seen... There's something that's like contrary to your view. People know you have a strong view in a certain area. And then, you know, they'll, as soon as something that's opposing to that view, people send you it. But no one will ever know, you know, and then it's like, then you have to kind of go get back to them and defend it. And then it's like, but then half the time I just let it go. But it's actually a lot of extra work when something like that comes out, right?
Oh, it totally is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, Chelsea. So I mean, just to get back to it, I knew she was in very good shape, especially running.
Yes.
She went to Kona and she did a camp there. So the plan was that we basically she went and did Collins Cup. She had a terrible race there. And then she was going to spend a bit of time at home, go out to Kona, do a bit of heat acclimation, go back to Davis, California, because where she lives in at home in Reno, it's at 1,800 meters of altitude. I think it's about that. So I didn't want her to go and double down on like do heat altitude. So we made the decision that she'd stay in Davis at more closer to sea level, and then she went from there, and then she went back to Kona again. And during that period, like before she went to Kona, she got sick, but the first few days were a bit rough when she got to Kona, but then she put in a really good block. And then when she got home, the next block she did was even better. So, you know, I was seeing her a lot of sessions, and there was a lot of complaints here and there, like, I can't do this, I can't do that. But she kept doing it and surprising herself, you know. And I mean, didn't surprise me at the time because otherwise I wouldn't have set the session. I thought she was more than capable of doing it. So I knew she was in very, very good running shape. And we talked, I mean, this was like months and months before the event. We talked about how, you know, Kona was the main goal and how we were going to kind of attack that race. And, you know, and as they say in Kona, the old adage that is you cycle for show and run for dough. And so we were always banking on her putting together a very good marathon performance, because I thought, you know, if she has a good marathon performance, she could definitely run onto the podium. So that's where we were putting all the eggs in that. So everything was around, you know, relax, swim, control everything on the bike, follow your numbers, and then put in a good marathon. With that, I was pretty convinced she could get a top 3. but then on the day, you don't know what that power is going to give you, right? So I knew that she could hold a certain amount of watts, but you don't know where that's actually going to put you. And she did, she went with the plan. She held the correct watts, and then she got off the bike. I think it was less than 4 minutes behind Lucy and Daniela. And as soon as that was there, I then thought there was a very strong chance of her winning, because I had a good feeling that she would run between a 250 and a 255 marathon. And that's what I told her. We'd planned that. We'd talked about aims for every single 10K of the marathon, aim for this 10K, going out a little bit harder. And yeah, so when she got off the bike, I thought I knew it would go, because I mean, you never know, but I thought it was very likely, because I knew that Daniela or Lucy were never going to, on the very best of days, they're going to run around 3 hours, right? And I felt Chelsea was going to run closer to 250. And when it was only, when it was less than 5 minutes, I was like, okay, we could be on the money. But you just, it's Kona, you just don't know. And it was her second ever Ironman. She could have blown, she could have got cramp, anything can happen, right? So I was a nervous wreck for like that 8 hours and 33 minutes. Well, actually, I kind of ignored it for a long time because I find it really difficult to watch. And I didn't really watch until she got off the bike. I was kind of following, but not really watching. I was trying to keep myself occupied, because I find it quite stressful. Got up, I went swimming. I did some work. I had to take my kids to a daycare and a new daycare to look at. So, and I had my phone off. I was trying not to get disturbed during that period. I was looking around a daycare for my children, so I had to be pretty present at the time. So I couldn't really be checking. Sorry. But yeah. And then, I think when I really celebrated was when she took that right turn to run down Palani. I knew it was on, I knew that was a done deal then. So yeah, brilliant.
So a couple of things, Dan. First of all, you mentioned that you said to Chelsea, run out a bit harder. So she had certain sort of goals for each 10K of the marathon. So did she not just try and keep it steady the entire way? Was it like, did she break the fundamental laws of running?
No, well, in a marathon in Kona, especially, me and Thorsten Rad, we wrote an article on this, and we analysed like good run pacing in Kona, and the best run pacing in Kona is actually to set out a little bit harder, because you will always slow down the back end of a marathon, so you can give yourself a little bit at the start, but just not too much. It has to be the right amount, particularly in the heat. And what we found in this article is it's really, you want to go about 1% quicker than your target. So if you're planning to run a 3 hours, you want to run that's what, 4:15. So you want to run about 1% quicker than 4:15s for the first 10K ish.
Yeah.
She ran out in, I think she ran the first K in like a way too fast, like a 3:40 or something like that. But her first 10K was in 3:51s, and I think that's public knowledge. And that's our target was 3:55. So she did run a little bit quicker, but that's all right.
Yeah,
Close
clearly
enough,
it was all right. Yeah. And and the other thing you mentioned was, of course, the watts on the bike, and you knew what she was capable of, but of course you didn't know where that would put her with regards to the women's field. But like when she was in her training cycle, were you like, how do you account for heat with regard and how she responds in the heat? Or is it because she spent that time in Kona, in that training camp in Kona, so you felt like you had a good gauge on what she could do there?
Yeah. So we basically, she's done 2 Ironman, and the target power for the Ironman in Kona was the same as in Hamburg, but she was a lot fitter for Kona. But like the heat and everything else, we made it the same. So we did back off the power. I mean, if it was a temperate, I think she could have done a little bit more power, but playing it a bit more safe with the heat. But I mean, everybody will go slower in the heat, no matter how acclimatized you are. It's just how much. And Chelsea's wasn't very much. She was very close because of the acclimation. So I mean, I think like the heat, like the research is clear. Heat acclimation can improve performance by 15%, and that's not like that. And that's from being doing racing in the heat acclimatize and not acclimatize. So if you do no heat acclimation or you do heat acclimation, you could be 15% better, but you'll still be a little bit worse. It's just how close can you get to your temperate performance, the way you perform in temperate conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dan, do you put sort of sauna work up there with regards to, so for people who are unable to travel to a place to do training, would you have utilized sauna for Chelsea?
Yeah, we do. I mean, particularly I don't really want to give too much away about the exact protocol, but there's you go out there, you do things you go out there, get some heat acclimation, you come to, then Chelsea went back to Davis. There was a period of time where we were using forms of heat acclimation that was more passive, to keep things topped up, But there's also this, I've talked about on a few podcasts now, is this idea of the plasticity of response, and the plasticity of response, it refers to so many, it's very, very apparent, and it's across many, many things. It's like, even in training, if you know someone who's done a lot of training in their life, when they start training again, they get fit really quick. They're just very plastic to that kind of the stress response stimulus. And it's the same at altitude. If you do it, the best way to know you're to be a positive responder to altitude is repeated stimulus. So the more you give the stimulus, the more you're likely to adapt positively and quicker. And it's the same in the heat. The more you give yourself a heat exposure, the more you will adapt positively to the heat, and you will do so quicker. So that's kind of the approach that we took. And even with Javier, like Javier Gomez, who I also coach, who's people who don't know, he's not a bad triathlete. Before St. George, we were doing repeated altitude exposures. So it's the same concept, but it's just different environments. You're just using different environments to achieve different things.
Yeah. Oh, super interesting. So and I'm just always really interested to know what the approach is. So as a coach, do you just focus on what Chelsea can do, or do you also study other athletes and base some of what your decisions are based on what you think that the athlete's going to do?
No, I don't really base it. We seldom talk about athletes, hardly ever really, because I mean, I just don't think it has any real impact. It has any effect. I mean, my method of coaching is I have this kind of work backwards approach where I'll look at I'll look at what people have done in the past, like winners have done in the past, and I'll try and get an idea of what I think they've hold in terms of watts per kilo, what that would mean in terms of coefficient of drag, so how aero they are for that kind of speed. And I say, I try and work out what Daniela Reef is, so she's probably holding around 240 watts, which is the X watts per kilo. And I'll try and just get a rough idea to base the training around, like what it takes to compete. I mean, that's and then I'll build the training program backwards from there. So, if I know what we're trying to target for, I can kind of then do a more of a gradual build and a bit of a targeted approach to that. Yeah, so it's really starting with the end in mind, but it's more based around values and data and physiology than what the other athletes are going to do. I mean, the only time we talk about athletes per se is like in our pre-race briefing. I always ask my athletes to say, okay, I ask for 3 scenarios of the day. I say, give me the worst case scenario, give me the likely case scenario, and the best case scenario. And usually within those conversations, there is talk of other athletes. Worst case scenario, I'm out with this athlete. Best case scenario, I'm out in this group. And if I'm with the worst athlete, if I'm in this, I'll do this. If I'm with the best case scenario, I'll do this. So we just try and, because I think it's dangerous if you have a race plan as well. You just have to talk about scenarios and how you're going to cope with them, because then you're prepared for them, rather than, because if you deal with one scenario, people just become unfolded immediately when they, when they come out of the swim and they're suddenly off their race pace, the scenario that they've had in their head for the past year or whatever, then they come undone. So totally,
and a lot of that's. So, I mean, that's all psychology, right? And I think about that with regards to in the ultra running space and nutrition. I mean, it's completely unrelated, but slightly, you need a plan A, B, and C for your nutrition, because if you only have one plan with your nutrition and it doesn't go to plan, then suddenly you lose your mind, and you
Exactly.
lose your confidence.
And it's brilliant that you bring that up, because we did have an A and a B plan for Chelsea, and you know what? She lost all of her nutrition. All came off. Yeah, so she lost all of her calories.
Far
but we
out.
had a plan B.
Yeah.
So she managed to get through. I mean, plan B in a good fat oxidation, you're winning.
Yeah,
because she's got a pretty good fat oxidation. You're okay. But if you've got a poor fat oxidation, you get and you've not got a plan B, you're in a bit of pickle, and people's races come undone, right? They just can't do anything anymore. So I mean, credit to her for that.
Yeah, for sure. Dan, can we pivot then to Chelsea's nutrition strategy? And I don't know how much of this you want to share or not, but how did you sort of go in thinking about it? Are you keen to give specifics? Like, what nutrition does she use?
Yeah,
actually?
I can give some specifics around that.
Yeah.
So obviously, we've tested her in the lab, so I have a solid idea of what her substrate usages are at different power outputs and whatnot. Fat versus carbohydrate, and I wrote a blog on it. I think that Right Fuel Right Time blog. I don't know if you've read that, where I talked about because we never really did a low carb approach with Chelsea, but we did do some specific macronutrient manipulation around exercise. I mean, it's funny though. There's been that Podcar and that new review that was brought out that said, there's not that much evidence for suggesting that periodizing carbohydrates is all it's cracked up to be. But I mean, I've had so much success with it, and I've seen it in the data. So anyway, but I just think I think we're not. I think there is evidence, and we are. Even in the article, they do say that it's still worth changing your carbohydrate around the training load, right, and the calorie requirements, which makes perfect sense. And but anyway, and we'd also tested a few situations, we'd gone up to 90 grams, because I knew I thought, okay, this is kind of the minimum that I think you can get away with, but do you want to try a bit more? So we tried up to 90 grams an hour, but Chelsea just hated it. She said she felt sick. It didn't, she didn't like it. She didn't like the way she could actually tolerate it, in the stomach, in the gastrointestinally, but she just didn't enjoy eating that much during racing. It was more of she felt disgusting to be eating that much food, and eating that much gel, so she didn't like it. So anyway, we did some testing, and we kind of settled on 60 grams per hour of a pure carbohydrate maltodextrin rather than a glucose fructose combination, because if you're at 60 grams per hour, you don't really need to be mixing. And I think fructose comes with its complications as well. So if you can avoid it, I think that's very positive. So yeah, I think we were aiming for that, and then I think she actually got pretty close to that on race day, maybe 50 to 60, even with her losing the calories. Yeah, so that was good. And then we aimed from cycling, we aimed that she was going to drink between 750 to 1 liter an hour. So we had some. I don't normally target fluid consumptions, but the aim in Kona or any hot race should be that you want to try and get onto the run as hydrated and as fueled as you possibly can. So that's so we aim for a little bit more in the fluid as well. I mean, you can only absorb maybe 1.3 liters per hour anyway, really. So I think you're going to be in a bit of trouble. I was listening to this podcast with Sam Laidlow, and he was saying that he had 17 liters over the course of the Ironman.
Wow.
So, I don't believe. I find that hard to believe, to be honest.
That's significant.
How would you possibly absorb 17 liters? I've never heard of anyone. So that's more than 2 liters an hour.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, but then everyone's different, right? Like in terms of.
Yeah, but most people can't absorb 2 liters.
Maybe, or maybe he's wrong, because that would have to be he would have had to have gone through 3 bottles an hour. A bottle every 20 minutes or something. Yeah,
it just seems like I've never heard of anyone being able to have. I've heard of people at 1.6 liters an hour, like maximal gastrointestinal absorption rates, but never up in the 2s.
Yeah, but then interesting you say that, Dan, because of course there was once a time where we thought you could only oxidize fat at a rate of 1 gram a minute. And now we understand that to be incorrect. So maybe, I don't know, outliers.
Yeah, there's always outliers, for sure.
Yeah. And if I go back to just just to the training piece a little bit, did you train Chelsea the way that you would have trained yourself? Or did you take into consideration any sex-specific recommendations, or anything like that?
I didn't train Chelsea the way I would train myself. I mean, the training was a bit more specific around what she needed. I felt that she needed a lot of strength endurance, and also she responded very well to high intensity. Like VO2, I found that if I can get some VO2 max running in her, like she would really start running very well because her economy is so good. So if you can it seems I just was finding that sort of thing would really bring the best out of her in many different ways. So probably a little bit more high intensity, a bit less tempo than what someone like I would do. But in terms of sex differences, it was just individualized. It was an individualized program for her, tracking HRV, tracking her training on a daily basis. And I mean, it was for her, regardless of whether she's male or female. It was a program that was designed just for her based on her responses. And that's why I think we've had this conversation before. I don't buy the differences between males and females. Yes, there are some, but it doesn't outweigh the differences between individuals. So if you're tracking on an individual basis, yes, I did do things because she was female, but really I did things because she was Chelsea.
Yeah.
You know, that was the thing. I did things because she was Chelsea, and Chelsea could have been a man, and it would have been the same thing. You know, it just would have been different. And that's the individualization, right? That's how you do things properly.
Yeah, and the science hasn't changed at all on that from the most recent symposiums that have gone ahead. Yeah. Like, you know, the information coming out is exactly what you've described with regards to nutrition and with sport.
Yeah, because there's massive differences between women, right? And there's massive differences between men, and there's also differences between men and women, but I don't know. Are the differences between men and women greater than the differences between individuals? You know, the individuals. I don't think so personally.
Yeah. And from a science perspective, we can't really say.
Yeah.
You mentioned HRV. What other sort of markers or metrics do you use, Dan, when you train Chelsea or your athletes?
I have I use a platform called Today's Plan. So there's a lot of data going into that, and I'll track a lot of the performance data, and I'll be looking at changes, making sure things are moving in the right direction. One of the main things I look at is submax heart rate, because that's so important for doing well in triathlon. I think, looking at basically heart rates coming down at a given speed over time, things are getting easier. I think that's really important. And then there's continuous communication. Well, we're always talking. And then I also, in Today's Plan, you can give feedback on the session, but also you can there's a scale that I find quite helpful, which is called the leg quality scale and the perceived recovery scale and the RPE of the session. So I often look at that to see, if she's giving really, really low perceived recovery before every session, I can use that alongside the HRV and the communication to tweak things a little bit. But it's not, it's not one thing is a silver bullet, right? It's lots of different things at the same time. I would never just rely on one metric to make a decision. I'd always pull a lot of them together to make an informed decision on where to move the training. So.
Yeah. Did you you would have seen that link I sent you through of the Rich Roll podcast with Gustav Eden?
I did see that. Yeah. I haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, super interesting. Rich is going to interview their coach probably for a bit more specifics as well, but they went into just so much detail about the training or more how they measure their training and the markers they use and the different wearables. And so their coach had them doing doubly labeled water actually to...
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Have you used anything like that, Dan?
I can't afford it, to be honest. Do you know how expensive that is? I mean, I've used it. We've done things in the lab, Like some of my PhD students have done it. We've done that in the lab for research, but never on an individual. Like it's very, very expensive to do that stuff. Very
How much is
expensive.
it?
I think like just one bottle of the water's like nearly $2,000.
Wow. Yeah, and then you have to
Yeah.
measure, and then you actually have to measure it, right? Or analyze it. I
Yeah,
think that,
yeah.
yeah.
I think that some of the yeah, it's interesting what the Norwegians are doing. I wonder how much of it's just bamboozling people, though. I think it's. I just wonder how if it's really. Yeah, I mean, it's very secretive. We don't. No one really knows what's going on there, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Interesting. And they also talked about CGM and using it. And,
yeah.
do you use that with your athletes? I know that you've been sort of beta testing, or you were last year beta testing Super Sapien and stuff. Like, what are your thoughts on it? Because I don't know that we've actually talked about it.
Yeah, I've used it for. I think it's really. I struggle for the application around training. uh, You know, I think it's good for seeing what foods trigger you, but I'm still struggling with the application with it around training. So, um, I just don't know. Well, I think we get into this problem. Well, especially in literature at the moment, and when you hear, well, not even the literature, it's just even the way people talk about things online. Like it seems to be like, oh, look, this person had 150 grams of carbs per hour on the bike, and it's like it's this competition to see who can consume the most sugar during racing, and it just baffles me. And I think like the CGM's kind of like in that space a little bit. It is like, oh, let's see who can keep their blood glucose the highest during racing, but like, why? I don't, why try and achieve that? And like, I think stable blood glucose during racing, okay, for sure, but I'm not convinced that they're really accurate enough to really get a good clutch and watch. I don't fully trust it. I think it's good for at rest, but I don't fully trust the data during exercise at the moment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's it, and I often wonder what more it can tell you outside of what you already feel anyway. Like I
yeah,
can always tell if I'm dropping a little bit in blood sugar. But
yeah,
maybe there are people who need that objective feedback because they don't recognize it as blood sugar drops. I don't know.
yeah. It's an interesting one. I think this could be, looking at like with the right fuel, right time approach. I think I think there'll be something in that is like using it to like be very targeted to the kind type of adaptation or training that you're doing at the time. Rather than just cramming a load of carbs in and having as high blood sugar as possible for every single type of session that you're doing. You might think that you have more targeted ranges for different types of sessions. So, like high intensity, you might want to be a bit higher. Lower intensity, you might want it a bit lower. I think there's a little bit in that, but I don't think it's there's so much learning to do in this space for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Do you test lactate much, Dan? And how useful would you find that?
No, I don't test lactate very much. I mean, I'm not with my athletes either, and so like I mean, we test it in the lab. Problem with lactate is that it's very well, you have to be very good at taking it. You have to be have very clean data, because it's very the errors can be massive if you don't have if you get contamination. So you have to be very good at it, and also it's very dependent on the environment. So if you don't have good baseline levels of what you expect your lactate to be in different heats and different humidities, then you need a lot of data to know what it is like normally to then make compare and contrast. And it's also different between individuals. Like 4 millimole is not necessarily a threshold for everyone. You have to test in the lab, and then you have to know where your lactates lie at different thresholds, and then you have to know where your lactates lie in different thresholds in different environments as well. So I don't use it that much. I mean, I fully believe that there is a lot of benefit from having like an intrinsic measure of physiological stress. But I tend to use heart rate for that rather than lactate, which is doing a very similar thing. Looking at and if I can, I'll take the lactate to kind of get a good gauge as well. Because I mean, there's there is negative points about heart rate. You do get heart rate suppression on some days, which gives you a bit of a false reading. But I think as long as you have a extrinsic measure, which is power and pace, and an intrinsic measure of internal physiology, can be lactate, can be heart rate. I think they're the two things you need. And whether you use heart rate or lactate, it's up to you. But heart rate's easy to use, better for the environment, so not and a lot less expensive.
Yeah.
So I think lactate's great for just understanding, making sure that the intensity is the intensity, particularly around threshold work, like VT1, VT2, because most people don't get that right. So just on the spot checking, look at the heart rate, check the lactate, tweak the intensity, particularly in the heat as well. If you're training in the heat, you can, you might want to, things shift quite a lot.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, interesting. And I think probably people listening to this will probably be quite not relieved, but like the idea that you don't actually need more than a couple of measures to get good, accurate information for progress on a training and recovery. It's quite good, because a lot of the things, as you say, are expensive and they're resource heavy in terms of time and availability, and then, of course, the environment.
And it's hard to do it on yourself properly. It's all right if you have a coach with you who's there, who's not sweating themselves, who's clean, and they can take a good sample. But most people try and do it on themselves, and they've got a sweaty hand on a sweaty hand. They get contaminated samples, and then and it's not just about. It's all about lactates. It's about knowing the metabolism and knowing the metabolic response. So if you're if you're training, so you might go in a training program, right? And you might be saying, okay, I'm going to do a threshold block in 4 weeks' time. So before you do a threshold block, as a coach, you might say, right, to get my athlete in the best possible position to do this threshold block, I'm going to build up a bit of anaerobic capacity, because it gives more space for them to do a good threshold block, because we can move up the upper level, we can build up the anaerobic reserve, and then that gives a bit more leeway to do more threshold work. So you might use lactates in the first instance to make sure that the lactates are high. So if you're doing 30-second sprints, for example, you want lactates 15 and above. That's ideal, like 15 to 20 even. That shows that you're having good anaerobic metabolism during that. But then, and if you've got the recovery too short and you're not really getting a good anaerobic metabolism, your lactates will be very high. So it gives you a good idea of how you can change that session. So if that particular instant you go, okay, now I'm going to increase the recovery duration because I'm not really getting the correct anaerobic response that I want for this session. And then once you've done that and you've done good training, you can go into the threshold block, and then you might be using the lactates to say, okay, I know that from the lab testing, my lactate is around 3.5 at threshold. I'm going to do it on power. So you set off at like 360 watts, for example, and then you do 3 intervals and your lactate's at 5, and you're like, okay, that's not getting the response that I want. I need to back off the power a little bit, and you might then dial it back down a little bit to where it needs to be.
Yeah, okay. But if you do that initial testing in lactate and power, then you'll have a good idea of where that power would sit.
Yeah, exactly. But it can change. It can change on the day, on how you feel, on the environment. Yeah. So that's the main thing, and how well rested you are, and all those sorts of things. So it can be powerful for getting the right, making sure the stimulus is the stimulus. Yeah.
Then Chelsea's had a history of like stress fractures. Did that change what you did with her at all with regards to training or anything like that? Or, of course, she had stress fractures, and then, of course, she became a mum, so she would have had a period of time of not training. So what's that? Or, specifically?
Well, when we had early consultations with Chelsea, if you remember, and I think one of the outcomes of that was we went quite heavy on the protein. It wasn't quite art level protein.
Well, there's an improvement to make for next time.
yeah, but we were like 30% protein, quite high in the protein. I think that was one of our reasons why, right, was we were trying to protect that side. But I think like the the softer shoes has made a big difference, like running in the carbon softer shoes quite a little bit more, I think has helped. But then it's just the normal things, is like not being too aggressive with the load. And even now I'm having to keep messaging in and say, you running? Are you running? Are you still running? Because I don't want her to stop doing anything, because I just think it's important to keep moving and reduce the injury risk when she comes back, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and obviously with being a mum, I can imagine that the number of hours available for training must be lower than other people that you might work with.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so. I don't think. I mean, we struggled for a long time to get the training to where we wanted it to go. But it wasn't because of a time thing. It was just because she wasn't recovering quickly enough. And I think when you're age groupers who are working and mums and parents, I think one of the main things is it's not necessarily the time. It's just that you don't really get the same quality recovery between the sessions, because you're on your feet, you're doing things. You can't just do your training and sit with your normal tech boots watching Netflix. You just can't do that, and that has its that has its implications. So I think that's the main thing, is that we just have to be a bit more mindful around time between sessions. And in the early days, we struggled to get the amount of key sessions that I would have liked to have got in per week. We really could only get 2 in, whereas I would kind of like to get 3 decent quality sessions in a week. But it's just the recovery. It's the recovery that's the main thing, rather than the time issue.
Yeah, and with recovery, obviously you mentioned the Normatec boots, and obviously, again, the ability to just spend time laxing out in them. Anything else specifically that you do with your athletes, Dan?
I mean, the main things are like good nutrition. So I always encourage them to eat well, eat properly, eat whole foods. Not too much sugar, not too much processed foods, and obviously keep on top of calories is super, super important. But the main thing with recovery is it's all around training periodization. And I think that's if you don't get that right, you may as well not bother with anything else, because it's all to do with what you're doing in between the big sessions. And with Chelsea, the main thing we had to focus on is time. How much time did she need between one quality session and another quality session? And then what needed to happen between those two, in terms of the training, to keep her, to not lose fitness, but also gain freshness.
Yeah.
It's like that's where the magic happens, is if you can get those two pieces right, is that you do a quality session, and then times in between you get fresher without losing fitness, and you do it again. That's kind of the art of it, and the kind of the science and the skill behind it.
Yeah. And do you work with other specialists, Dan, with regards to, mindset, for example? Is that something that you might do with your athletes, or do you leave them to their own devices, or do you bring in sports psychs or anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely talk to them about mindset, but it's not my area of expertise. And I think one of the things that we're quite good at is that I do not think I'm an expert in everything, right? And there's people who know way more than I do in so many things, like yourself, for example. We brought you in because you know way more about nutrition than I do. So, getting help from you, we brought in Paul Newsom from who's founder of Swim Smooth from Swim Common. We brought him in to help specifically with the swimming technique, and he was a game changer. He helped us massively. We had someone who helped with the aerodynamics and the position on the bike. And I don't try and do all these things myself, because there's people who are way better than me, and if you can lean on them to help, because it's definitely a team effort, right? If you can lean on these people to help, then everyone wins, right? And I don't expect the like Paul or the aerodynamics guy to know what I know about testing and metabolism and training, right? I don't expect them to know those things, but I think it's important that everyone in your team is an expert in their areas, right? So. But also, people have to admit that they're not an expert in everything as well. That's super important. And I think many coaches are terrible at that. They're terrible. They just think there's a bit of a God complex, and they think they know everything about everything, So.
Yeah. And actually, my sort of final question was actually going to be what mistakes you see other coaches make or athletes make, and I from your perspective, and I wonder whether that would actually be a big one, the one that you've just sort of hit on.
Yeah, it is a massive one. It's a massive one. It's I think often egos get in the way in sport as well, and I think one of the main things is thinking, if you don't build a team around you, and that's one thing that I've learned from being in Olympic programs, particularly, women's kayak, which I'm still involved in. We've got such a team of experts, and I look at like Lisa Carrington, for example, and I look at the team around her, and I'm like, wow, she's got a real team of experts who are amazing, and our coach Gordon Walker is exceptional at knowing when to bring in experts at different things. And I look at that as a Olympic sport that I think is highly professional, and then I look at Ironman and I'm like, wow, that is not professional at all. But I try and, as best I can, it's a different thing, right? I try and emulate that kind of team around the athlete mentality as best I can in the Ironman sphere as well. And I think that's, if you're a one-man band, you're only doing your athletes a disservice, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, good call. And finally, Dan, like, are you taking athletes? Like, has your inbox exploded, and are you actually accepting athletes for coaching? Like, what's sort of going on in your coaching realm?
Yeah. I mean, we've had a lot of interest, but people buying courses and wanting to be and one-on-one coaching. We've also got the training squad, which has been going really well. But I mean, the training squad's always open. We've had a lot of people join there, and we get real positive. We had 25 athletes in Kona.
Amazing.
Many of those were from the training squad. I think it's like a lot of people, a lot of athletes, and I think we got like 10. It sounds like a small number, but like 10% of our squad athletes, or some figure like that, were in Kona. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty impressive, right? I mean, so we do get good results. So we're always taking people on with the squad, trying to grow that community, and we're always trying to improve it, which is kind of like it's like it's more of a community, less one-on-one, but we have like webinars and sessions and a community page where people can join, and workouts, programs, rolling plans, based on Southern Hemisphere training phases and training plans. And then my one-on-one, I've had a lot of requests since Chelsea, but I'm just at the moment I'm kind of just interviewing people and trying to see, because I can really probably only take on 2 or 3, so and then so I'm just kind of just seeing who I like and how it works, and
if it would be a good fit.
It's important that you get along, right?
Totally.
Yeah, who's a good fit, exactly.
Yeah, totally.
Who's a good fit.
I got to say, it's almost every time I'm on Facebook, I see that Dan Plews is live in that squad. Like, that squad is great. It really does have that community feel, and you were in there quite a lot.
Yeah, well, what you're seeing, there's 2 separate things actually, because what you see is the education community. So we have our 4 courses, and we're just about to launch a coaching subscription actually. So anyone who wants to be an Endure IQ coach, be part of the actual coaching team and be an Endure IQ coach, which offers a lot of opportunities for coaches, because we have all the resources, and also you just get more athletes. Like I've had one of my coaches who joined us, he's been with us a couple of years now, and when he increased his prices by more than $100 USD, and we've given him like 24 athletes now. So he's gone from like into making good money with his coaching company, with his coaching, because of the endorsement. So we're just about to launch that, but one of the reasons behind the course is because my original thought was that I really wanted to have a coaching subscription and a coaching community and coaching team, but I was never keen on just having randoms who weren't educated in the philosophy of Endure IQ. So we got those courses. But what you see in the Facebook is the educational community. So that's for people who are doing the courses. And then on top of that, we have another community, which is the training squad community. So we have that one as well, which is kind of more people asking questions about their own training, whereas the other one is people asking questions on the education material.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Awesome, Dan. And then what else? And what about you? What's new? Obviously, you're still, I mean, it's only been a couple of weeks since Kona. Like, what's on the horizon for you in the next 3 to 6 months?
I'm doing Ironman New Zealand in December.
Are you?
Yeah.
How's the training?
It's going to be a very short but acute build.
Do you remember like, I want to say 7 years ago, Ben Greenfield did a 4-week lead up to Kona Ironman?
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Well, if Ben Greenfield
bombed.
can do that, I'm sure I can do it.
I'm sure.
Twice the talent.
Yeah.
No, so I actually entered the day before. I was sat there night before I turned 40. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did it on and I was like, oh, and I kind of just, I think it. I mean, I'm not going to be. I just want to do it because it's just something to. I kind of want to keep in touch with what it feels like to do an Ironman as well. I haven't done one since 2018, and I feel like I'm talking about it all the time, but I've not done one in ages now.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to keep in touch with that side of things, feel it, do it. It'll be interesting to see how fit I can get in 2 months. I'm certainly not going to. I don't think I'm going to be breaking any records, but it'll be an interesting experiment to see how we go over that. So there's that, and then the other is I mean, I've got Javier's here at the moment in New Zealand, so I was spending a bit of time with him. But I think like my big plans for 2023 with Javi and Chelsea, and hopefully, the ideal is that we get some great results in Kona with both of them at the same time. That's kind of the big project. And apart from that, we just continue to grow the business.
That's awesome, Dan. And what I love about what you do is that you sort of hit almost every area of that sort of triathlon space. So you've got your age groupers, you've got the squad, you've got your elites, but you're also out there educating other people to do it, in a different way as well. And you're so based in science, and you're not beholden to emotion when it comes to the way things should be done. You're quite clinical in how you approach things, and I always appreciate that about you. And, you're right.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. I think one of the things is that you said what makes a good and a bad coach. I think I always try and admit when I'm wrong. I think that's an important thing as well. Is you don't get stuck in your own ways and don't get stuck in your own theories and beliefs. And I think that's one thing that we definitely taught. Like Paul Lawson, who's obviously been on your show. One of the things that he taught me, PhD supervisor, was he was always never be afraid of changing your views and admitting when you're wrong when it comes to, and I think that's really important when it comes to coaching and science.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure. All right, Dan. Well, thanks so much. Now remind people where they can find you.
Well, I'm pretty active on the Instagram and pretty active on there. Not massively active, not as active as some, but I'm pretty active. And then you can follow sign up to the Brew Up as well, our newsletter, so you can just go onto enduriq.com and sign up there, and we give a bi-weekly newsletter there, and they're probably the two best ways to find us.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Well, you get back to enjoying the day after your 40th birthday. And probably some of that cake. I'm sure there must be some of that 5-layer cake left that you made. No,
well, we gave so much of it away, actually. So, yeah. And you're still in the US, right?
Yeah. I'm still in LA, about to head to Hawaii in a couple of days for meeting Barry for 5 days holiday.
Tough gig, eh? Tough gig.
I know. This is the thing. This is the working for yourself thing, the being able to work remote thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a choice.
All right, Mikki. Cool. Until next time.
See you later. All right. Hopefully you enjoyed that. It's exciting to hear that Dan is making a sort of comeback to Ironman New Zealand in December. It's always good as an athlete to have a goal, and I think that's really what Dan was hoping for by signing on the dotted line for that. And regardless of sort of where he's at right now with regards to his competitiveness, I think it would be great just to see him back out there. So really looking forward to that. And next week on the podcast, we do speak to Dr. Michael Twineman. So that is still on the agenda. We just pushed it back a week because I was able to get Dan in just to have a wee chat about Chelsea. Until then though, next week, please don't forget about that webinar. Links in the show notes. You can catch me over on Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, over on Instagram and Twitter at Mikki Williden, or head to my website mikkiwilliden.com, where you can book a one-on-one consult with me, sign up to one of my meal plans, put your name on the waitlist for Monday's Matter, which is coming to be open again, and just as a good way to connect. All right, team, you have a great week and talk to you next week.